So this is part 2 of key features of functions, and we're going to be looking at the relative extrema of a graph. So a relative extrema of a function is any point where the graph turns around. In the graph below, there are 4 relative extrema. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So some of the questions are as simple as that. 2 of them are relative maxima, and maxima is just plural for maximum. And then 2 of them are relative minima or minimums. Like you could say minimums, it's just not really the proper term. So these 2 are the maxes. You can think of them like a top of the hill. Basically, it just means high points. And then these 2 are the minimums. And technically, you could have a maximum that's actually lower than a minimum point. So let's see if I can draw this. Okay, so this is a relative minimum because compared to the parts that are by it, it's a low spot. This is still a relative maximum. Okay, so it's about what's around it, what's relative to it. So we're going to scroll down the page and just look at our first Delta Math problem. So this one says the function f of x is graphed below. How many points on the graph represent a relative extreme value? So when we see that, that means any of those relative extreme points. So I see 1, 2, C and E are x-intercepts, so they don't count. They're not turning points there, so there's 3. So the answer to this one is 3 relative extrema. Actually there's one more on this page, so just scroll down. This one says the function f of x is graphed below. How many points on the graph represent a relative minimum point? So this one right here is basically, sorry, I'm just getting to my page. I wrote some notes I wanted to say. So this one, I don't know, it's not really a max or a min, it kind of flattens out, and we'll talk about what makes that later in the course. This one is a min, that one's a max, so we only have 1 point that represents a relative minimum. The next problem, let me just go back, I think I had one more at the bottom there. Yep, I went to page too far. So this one says the function f of x is graphed below. How many points on the graph represent a relative maximum? So looking at this one has no high points. It does have arrows going to infinity, but those don't count because they're not the turning points. So the answer to this one is just 0. So sometimes you could have an answer of 0. So the last thing we're going to put on this video, a minimum or maximum value of a function. So this is not a point, this is a value of a function. Is the lowest or highest y value respectively. This is in contrast to the minimum or maximum point, which includes both x and y values. This is also not a relative minimum or maximum. They're not talking about those turning points. They're talking about the lowest a graph goes, and the highest. And they only want the y values when you see this. So we're going to go to the Desmos calculator. We have functions to type in. So I'll switch over to that. And this first function we're going to work with is 1.5x. Remember, shift 6 gives you that little caret for the exponent. Looks kind of like what's on a graphing calculator. So here's my graph. I'm going to move it over. I mean, this window's not great. I'm just going to remind you, I feel like there's a lot of extra space up here. So maybe I just go from, I don't know, maybe -20. It's the wrong one. Sorry about that. I'm going to keep this -5 to 5 here. And this is kind of what graphing's like. Sometimes you have to make some changes. I definitely need more on this side. So maybe I'm going to go -10 to 5, and maybe I'll go -20 to 20 over here. So this kind of, zoomed in. I did not have to do that. Now I'm trying to find the minimum value. So if I scroll around here, it gives me that minimum point. Now this point is -2.333, -6.367. I want the minimum value to the nearest hundredth. So I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to write the point they gave me just so we can connect this. So negative 2.333, negative 6.367. So value of a function is a y value. That's the number, and I want to round it to the nearest hundredth. So that's going to be negative 6.37 for my final answer. So we're going to look at one more of those just to make sure we're clear. So here's my second function. We'll go back to Desmos and type that one in, negative 1.1 x squared. And I suggest going on Desmos and actually trying these yourself, kind of going through the problems. This one, I'm just going to pick up my graph and slide it over, and I'm going to kind of hover over that maximum point because that's what I want. So here I see, so I lost it, 6.627, so that's going to round to 6.63. So I'll write that down in notes. So I kind of skipped some of the baby steps here, right? Writing the point, rounding. My maximum value, my maximum y value is 6.63.